There is a moment that happens to almost everyone who visits Scotland for the first time. It does not happen at a famous landmark or a crowded tourist site. It happens on a road, usually somewhere in the Highlands, when the landscape opens up around a bend, and what is in front of you is so vast and so old and so indifferent to your presence that something in your chest does something unexpected. Not quite emotion, not quite awe. Something older than both of those words, something that does not have a name in English but that the Scots characteristically have a word for. Sgriob. The tingle of anticipation before something extraordinary happens. Except in Scotland, it happens after you have already seen it. Because the landscape does not build to a peak. It simply is, all at once, everything it is going to be, and you are not prepared. Scotland is a small country. It covers roughly 78,000 square kilometers in the northern third of the island of Great Britain and has a population of around 5.5 million people. By the numbers, it should not punch as hard as it does. It should not produce the kind of lifelong attachment that people who visit it once describe with an intensity that makes their friends uncomfortable. It should not be the subject of more romantic mythology, more cultural projection, more sheer accumulated longing from people who have never set foot in it than almost any comparable piece of land on Earth. And yet. Start with the landscape, because the landscape is where Scotland begins. The Scottish Highlands are one of the oldest landscapes on Earth. The mountains here, the Cairngorms, the Northwest Highlands, the hills above Loch Lomond are not young mountains. They are not the sharp, dramatic peaks of the Alps or the Rockies built by relatively recent geological violence. They are ancient, rounded, worn down over hundreds of millions of years of erosion into forms that feel less like rock and more like the memory of rock. The highest point in the British Isles, Ben Nevis, rises to only 1,345 meters. In purely altitudinal terms, it would be unremarkable in the Alps. In Scotland, it feels enormous. Partly because of its bulk and its weather and the way it dominates the landscape around Fort William, but mostly because of what surrounds it. A landscape of such horizontal scale, such open, empty, treeless moorland and glen, that vertical scale becomes relative in ways it does not elsewhere. The Cairngorms National Park is the largest national park in the British Isles and one of the most significant areas of wild land in Europe. It contains 5 of the 6 highest mountains in Britain, a plateau of Arctic alpine habitat that supports species found nowhere else in the country, including the only free-ranging reindeer herd in Britain, red squirrels, ospreys, capercaillie, and the Scottish wildcat, one of the rarest mammals on Earth, a creature so endangered that its total wild population may number in the dozens. The Cairngorm Plateau in winter, when snow covers the high ground and the light is low and blue and the wind is the only sound for miles in every direction, is one of the most genuinely remote experiences available in Western Europe without leaving the road network entirely. The Northwest Highlands are different again. This is the Torridonian sandstone country, a landscape of isolated mountains rising from flat, boggy moorland in forms so individual and so dramatic that each one has its own character and its own mythology. Suilven, rising from the flow country of Sutherland like a ship's hull from a flat sea. And Tallaght in Wester Ross, its jagged ridgeline one of the finest scrambles in Scotland. Stac Pollaid, small but so extraordinary in its silhouette that it appears in more photographs of the Northwest than any mountain 5 times its size. These mountains are not part of a range. They stand alone, each one rising from the same flat, ancient landscape, each one a separate statement rather than part of a chorus. And then there is Glencoe. Glencoe is one of those places where the landscape and the history have become so intertwined that it is almost impossible to see one without the other. The glen itself is a U-shaped valley carved by glaciation, its walls rising steeply to ridges and summits that in bad weather disappear into cloud and in good weather reveal a scale that is genuinely disorienting. The Three Sisters, the trio of spurs descending from the Anach Igach ridge on the south side of the glen, create a composition that has been photographed millions of times and remains impossible to adequately capture. The River Coe runs through the valley floor, dark with peat, past stands of gnarled ancient woodland that are among the oldest in Scotland. and in February 1692, in a farmhouse in this glen, members of the Campbell clan murdered 38 members of the MacDonald clan in their sleep, violating the laws of Highland hospitality that were among the most sacred in Scottish culture. The Glencoe massacre, ordered by the government of William III as a political message to Jacobite sympathisers, has never been forgotten. It is still referenced in Scottish pubs. There are still establishments in the Highlands where the sign above the door reads, "No hawkers, no Campbells." The landscape Glencoe does not explain the massacre, but standing in it in the shadow of those enormous walls of rock, with the weather coming in and the light going, you understand how a place this enclosed and this remote could hold a horror this complete. The lochs are the second landscape, and they deserve their own account. Scotland has over 30,000 freshwater lochs, more than any comparable area in Europe, and they range from the small and intimate hill lochs that sit in mountain corries like dropped mirrors to the enormous inland seas of the Great Glen that divide the country along a geological fault line running from Inverness to Fort William. Loch Ness is the most famous, and its fame has almost nothing to do with its considerable natural grandeur, and almost everything to do with a blurry photograph taken in 1934 that has generated more tourism revenue per alleged monster than any other cryptozoological claim in history. The Loch Ness Monster, or Nessie as the global tourist industry has rendered it, is almost certainly not real. Loch Ness itself is extraordinary regardless. 23 miles long, over 750 feet deep, containing more fresh water than all the lakes of England and Wales combined, its dark, peat-stained water genuinely opaque below a few meters, and its shores lined with ancient woodland and the ruins of Urquhart Castle, one of the most photographed ruins in Scotland. Loch Lomond is the largest loch in Britain by surface area, its southern shore accessible from Glasgow in under an hour, and its northern reaches genuinely wild. The transition from the urban central belt to the Highland landscape happening within the space of a few miles in a way that is one of Scotland's most remarkable geographical features. The Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park, established in 2002, protects this transition zone and the country to its north. And on a clear summer day, the view from the summit of Ben Lomond across the loch and south toward Glasgow is one of the finest available from any mountain in Britain. Loch Torridon in Wester Ross is smaller and less famous and more beautiful than either of them. It sits below the mountains of Torridon in a landscape of such concentrated drama, the peaks rising directly from the water's edge, the light on the loch in the late afternoon shifting through colours that landscape photographers pursue from around the world, that it is routinely cited by people who know Scotland well as the place they would take someone who had never been and needed to understand what all the fuss was about. Edinburgh is the capital, and it is one of the great cities of Europe. The city is built on and around a series of ancient volcanic plugs and ridges that give it a topography unlike any other European capital, its medieval old town climbing the spine of rock from Holyrood at the bottom to the castle at the top in a series of narrow closes and steep stairs and ancient tenement buildings that pack centuries of human habitation into a remarkably compact space. The castle itself sits on the remnant of a volcanic plug that has been fortified in some form for over 3,000 years, its position on the rock so commanding that it was essentially impregnable to assault from the north, west and south, the sheer cliff faces doing the defensive work that walls and towers do elsewhere. The Royal Mile, the name given to the sequence of streets running from the castle to the Palace of Holyrood House at the bottom of the Old Town, is one of the most historically dense urban corridors in Europe. Every close and wind leading off it contains a story. Mary King's Close, the sealed underground street where residents were supposedly walled in during a plague outbreak. A story that history does not entirely support, but that the city has turned into one of its most popular visitor attractions. The Grass Market, where public executions were held until the 18th century. The Greyfriars Kirkyard, the churchyard where the famous loyal dog Greyfriars Bobby kept vigil at his master's grave for 14 years, and where the Covenanters, Scottish Presbyterians who resisted the imposition of the English Church were imprisoned in conditions of extraordinary brutality in the 1670s. Below the old town, the new town is a masterpiece of Georgian urban planning. Its grid of wide streets and elegant squares designed in the 1760s to provide the city's growing professional class with an environment that matched their aspirations. The contrast between the organic, vertical, medieval density of the old town and the rational, horizontal, classical order of the new town, separated by the gardens of Princes Street that occupy the valley between them, is one of urban Europe's most dramatic pairings. And it is why Edinburgh was among the first cities in the world to have its entire historic centre designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Edinburgh Festival, held every August, is the largest arts festival in the world. The city's population of around 500,000 effectively doubles during the festival month, as the Fringe alone brings over 3,000 shows across hundreds of venues ranging from purpose-built theatres to pub backrooms to converted churches to the street itself. The festival has been a fixture of the cultural calendar since 1947, when it was founded in the aftermath of the Second World War as a deliberate act of cultural healing. And it has grown into something so large and so various and so chaotically energetic that it changes the character of the city entirely for its duration, turning Edinburgh into something between a carnival and a cultural referendum and a very large, very enthusiastic party. Arthur's Seat, the ancient volcano that rises from Holyrood Park in the middle of the city, deserves specific mention because it is one of the most extraordinary things about Edinburgh, and one of the least adequately described. It is a mountain, an actual mountain of 250 meters, within the city boundary, accessible on foot from the city centre in under half an hour. Its summit offering a 360-degree view that takes in the castle, the Forth Estuary, the Pentland Hills, and on a clear day, the mountains of the Highlands to the north. Edinburgh is the only major European capital with a mountain inside it, and the fact that this is treated as entirely normal by its residents is one of the things about the city that visitors find most charming. Glasgow is the second city, and it deserves more than second billing. Glasgow spent most of the 20th century defined by its industrial decline and the social problems that accompanied it. The deindustrialization that followed the collapse of the shipbuilding industry on the Clyde, the poverty and violence and poor health outcomes that made it an international symbol of urban deprivation. That story is real, and its legacy is still visible in parts of the city. But it is not the complete story, and it has not been the complete story for some time. The Glasgow that exists today is one of the most culturally vibrant cities in Britain, its art scene rooted in the Glasgow School of Art and the tradition of innovative, often confrontational visual culture that it has produced since the 19th century. Charles Rennie Mackintosh, whose Art Nouveau designs transformed early 20th century architecture and decorative arts, was a Glaswegian, and his influence is visible throughout the city in buildings, interiors, and the design culture that his work inspired and that the city has never stopped celebrating. The Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum is one of the finest civic art museums in Britain, its collection ranging from Salvador Dali's Christ of St. John of the Cross to an extraordinary assembly of Scottish colourists to a Spitfire hanging from the ceiling of the main hall. It is free to enter, as are all of Glasgow's main civic museums, a policy of public access to culture that the city has maintained as a point of principle. The food and drink scene in Glasgow has transformed in the past 2 decades into something genuinely impressive. The West End around Byres Road and the Merchant City in the east of the centre are both dense with restaurants, bars and cafes operating at a standard that would not embarrass any European city of comparable size. The music scene, which has produced everything from Simple Minds to Teenage Fan Club to Mogwai to Chevy Arches, is embedded in the city's social fabric in a way that makes Glasgow's live music venues some of the most enthusiastically attended in Britain. The Barrowland Ballroom, a dance hall from the 1930s above the East End market of the same name, is regarded by musicians who have played it as one of the best venues in the world. Its crowd density and acoustic properties and sheer atmospheric intensity producing performances that take on a quality unavailable elsewhere. The Clyde, the river that made Glasgow and then nearly broke it, is undergoing its own reinvention, The Riverside Walkway, the Riverside Museum designed by Zaha Hadid, the Science Centre, and the ongoing development of the former industrial waterfront have created a stretch of city that is beginning to reflect ambition rather than regret. The view of the city from the south bank of the Clyde on a clear evening, the towers of the financial district rising above the older fabric of the city, the lights of the bridges reflected in the dark water, is a version of Glasgow that its residents are still getting used to seeing. The islands are a country within the country. Scotland has over 900 islands, of which around 100 are permanently inhabited. They range from the Orkney archipelago off the north coast, low and fertile and extraordinarily rich in prehistoric archaeology, to the Outer Hebrides stretching down the Atlantic coast, long and exposed and home to some of the most linguistically and culturally distinct communities in Britain, to Skye, the most visited of the Highland Islands, its dramatic Quillen Ridge the most technically demanding mountain terrain in Britain, and its landscape so photographed that certain viewpoints have had to be managed to prevent the parking and path erosion that popularity generates. Skye deserves extended attention because it occupies a particular place in the Scottish imagination as well as in the international perception of the country. The island is connected to the mainland by a bridge that opened in 1995. Replacing the ferry crossing that had defined the approach to the island for centuries, and generating controversy among those who felt the bridge diminished the experience of arrival. The controversy has faded. The island itself has not. The Quillen, the jagged volcanic ridge that dominates the south of the island, is the only true alpine terrain in Britain, its gabbro rock providing exceptional grip for climbers, and its peaks requiring genuine mountaineering skill rather than merely walking ability. The fairy pools in Glen Brittle, a series of clear blue-green pools below small waterfalls in the shadow of the Quillen, have become one of the most visited natural sights in Scotland, their colour an improbable Caribbean turquoise in a landscape that is otherwise entirely Highland in character. The Old Man of Storr, a basalt pinnacle rising from the Trottenish Ridge above the Sound of Rasay, has been photographed so many times in so many conditions that it has become almost a cliché of Scottish landscape photography, which changes nothing about its actual visual impact when you stand below it in morning mist. Orkney is a different world again. This is low, windswept, intensely farmed land, green and productive in a way that surprises visitors expecting the drama of the West Coast. And beneath its seemingly ordinary agricultural surface, it conceals some of the most significant prehistoric archaeology in Europe. The heart of Neolithic Orkney, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, encompasses the village of Skara Brae, the standing stones of Stennes and the Ring of Brodgar, and the passage tomb of Maeshowe. Skara Brae was inhabited around 5,000 years ago, before Stonehenge was built, and the preservation of its stone furniture, its hearths and beds and storage compartments, by the sand that buried it, is so complete that walking through it produces a specific vertigo. The sense of looking directly into the domestic life of people who lived here when the pyramids were new. The Outer Hebrides, the chain of islands running from Lewis and Harris in the north to Barra in the south, are the last stronghold of Scottish Gaelic as a community language. A place where the language is heard in shops and on the street and in the churches and at the Caelids in a way that has largely disappeared from the mainland. The Callanish standing stones on Lewis, a cruciform arrangement of megaliths erected around 5,000 years ago on a promontory above a sea loch, are less famous than Stonehenge and in many respects more affecting, more intimate in scale, more dramatically positioned, and less managed in ways that allow a visitor to approach them without barriers and stand among them in a silence broken only by the wind and the distant sound of the Atlantic. Harris tweed, woven by hand in the homes of islanders under a legal protection that specifies both the material and the method of production, is one of the last genuinely artisanal textiles produced at commercial scale anywhere in the world. The beaches of the west coast of Harris and the Uists, the Machares as they are called, strips of shell sand pasture above white sand beaches facing the open Atlantic, are among the most beautiful coastal landscapes in Europe and among the least visited. a combination that will not last forever, but that currently makes the Outer Hebrides one of the genuinely off-the-beaten-track destinations available within the British Isles. The whiskey is not optional. Scotch whisky is one of the most successful food and drink exports in the history of international trade, generating billions of pounds in export revenue annually, and creating an industry of visitor tourism around its distilleries that has made places like Speyside and Islay into genuine destinations for people who might otherwise never have visited rural Scotland. There are over 140 active distilleries in Scotland, producing Scotch across 5 main regional styles, whose characters are as distinct from each other as Burgundy is from Bordeaux. The Speyside region in the northeast, centered on the River Spey and its tributaries, contains the highest concentration of distilleries in the world, more than half of all Scottish distilleries within a relatively small area. The whiskies here tend toward the elegant and complex, their character shaped by the cold, clear Highland water, the high quality of local barley, and the concentration of cooperage expertise that has accumulated in the region over centuries. Glenfiddich, the Macallan, Glenlivet, Aberlour. These are names that appear on the top shelves of bars in every country on earth. And they are made in this specific valley in northeast Scotland in a process that has changed less in the past century than the marketing around it might suggest. Islay, the southernmost of the Inner Hebrides, produces whiskey of an entirely different character. The island's peat, cut from boggy ground that has accumulated over thousands of years, imparts a smokiness to the malted barley used in its distilleries that gives Islay whiskey its defining quality. That combination of iodine, seaweed, smoke, and salt that either converts the drinker immediately or produces a polite and permanent refusal. Lafroig, Lagavulin, Ardbeg. These are the great smoky whiskies of the world, and the island that produces them is itself worth visiting, a small, flat, beautiful island of white-painted distilleries on rocky shores above a sea that explains precisely where the taste comes from. The tradition of the dram, a measure of whiskey offered to a guest as an act of hospitality, is one of the few Highland traditions that has survived the centuries with its meaning intact. In a Highland pub on a winter evening when the fire is lit and the rain is against the windows and someone pours you a measure of something old and local and pushes it across the bar without comment, you are participating in a hospitality tradition that predates the nation-state and is woven into the fabric of Scottish culture at a level that no amount of tourism marketing has yet managed to make it feel commercial. The history is everywhere, and it is not simple. Scotland's history is one of the most complex and contested of any small nation on earth. It involves a succession of invasions and resistances, internal divisions and external pressures, cultural suppressions and cultural revivals that have produced a national identity of extraordinary intensity and occasional contradiction. The Romans built Hadrian's Wall to contain it and then built the Antonine Wall further north when containing it proved insufficient, and then abandoned both and went home. The Vikings settled the northern and western islands and left enough of their genetic and cultural inheritance that Orkney and Shetland felt more Nordic than Scottish for centuries. The Wars of Independence in the 13th and 14th centuries produced William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, and the Declaration of Arbroath, the 1320 document that articulated the sovereignty of the Scottish people in terms so clear and so powerful that it is cited as an influence on the American Declaration of Independence 4.5 centuries later. The Jacobite risings of the 18th century, culminating in the Battle of Culloden in 1746, where the Highland clans who supported the Stuart claim to the British throne were crushed by government forces in under an hour, produced a cultural trauma whose reverberations are still felt. Culloden is the most visited battlefield in Scotland, a flat, boggy moor outside Inverness, where the clans of the Highlands made their last military stand, and where the grave markers of the fallen, arranged by clan, create a landscape of memorial that is quiet and devastatingly effective. The aftermath of Culloden was the systematic destruction of Highland culture, the banning of tartan, the suppression of Gaelic, the disarmament of the clans, and then, in the following century, the Highland clearances, in which landlords evicted hundreds of thousands of tenants from the land they had farmed for generations to make way for more profitable sheep grazing, emptying the Highlands of much of their population and producing a diaspora that seeded Scottish communities across the world from Nova Scotia to New Zealand. The clearances explain something important about the Scottish Highlands that visitors sometimes find puzzling: why a landscape of such dramatic beauty is so empty. The Highlands were not always this empty. They were emptied deliberately within living memory of people who are not yet very long dead, and the emptiness that makes the landscape feel so wild and so romantic to modern visitors is in significant part the result of an act of dispossession that the descendants of those who were cleared have not forgotten. The question of Scotland's future is the question the country is currently living through, and it cannot be avoided in any serious account of the place. Scotland voted to remain part of the United Kingdom in the independence referendum of 2014 by a margin of 55% to 45%, a result that the Scottish National Party, which had campaigned for independence, accepted while making clear it did not consider the matter settled. The subsequent Brexit vote of 2016, in which Scotland voted by 62% to remain in the European Union while England and Wales voted to leave, deepened the sense of divergence between Scottish and English political identity and renewed the independence debate with an energy that has not since dissipated. The constitutional question is live, contested, and unresolved. Scottish politics revolves around it in a way that makes the country's democratic conversation both more intense and more substantive than in many comparable democracies. There is a road in the Northwest Highlands called the North Coast 500. It is a 500-mile circular route around the northern coastline of Scotland, starting and ending in Inverness, passing through some of the most dramatic and least populated landscape in Europe. It passes through Torridon and Applecross and the Bealach Naba Pass, which rises to over 600 meters and offers a view of the Inner Sound and the island of Skye that has stopped drivers in the middle of the road since the moment it was paved. It passes through Ullapool, the small fishing port on Loch Broom that serves as the ferry terminal for Lewis and Harris, and that has a concentration of excellent restaurants and a fish and chip shop that is consistently voted among the best in Scotland. It passes through Durness in the far northwest and along the north coast through Tongue and Betty Hill and Wick, and then south through Caithness and Inverness Shire back to where it began. The route was branded and marketed as a tourist route only in 2015 and became within a few years one of the most discussed road trips in Europe. The popularity has brought traffic to roads that were designed for tractors and sheep, and the infrastructure of some sections struggles with the demand, but the landscape it passes through does not struggle. The landscape through which the North Coast 500 runs is the same landscape it has always been. Ancient, enormous, indifferent, and more beautiful than almost anywhere else in the world that does not require a long-haul flight to reach. Scotland is not a comfortable country. It does not offer the warmth of the Mediterranean or the infrastructure of Central Europe or the culinary abundance of France or the urban sophistication of London. It offers something different and, for the people it gets hold of, something more. A landscape of such age and scale that it recalibrates the human sense of proportion. A culture of such historical density that every ruined castle and empty glen and pub conversation carries weight beyond its immediate subject. A people of such particular character, dry and direct and hospitable and entirely unwilling to be impressed by their own mythology, that spending time with them is its own form of education. People who visit Scotland once tend to go back. People who go back tend to keep going back. And the ones who ask themselves why, who try to locate the specific quality of the attachment, tend to find that it is not any single thing. Not the whiskey or the landscape or the cities or the history or the islands. It is something in the combination of all of them. Something in the way the country holds its own past and its own future simultaneously in a landscape old enough to make both seem briefly, blessedly small. That is what Scotland does to people. It puts things in perspective. And perspective, it turns out, is one of the rarest things travel can offer. Go. And when the weather closes in and the midges find you and the road narrows to single track and the visibility drops to nothing, remember that this is not Scotland failing to be somewhere else. This is Scotland being exactly what it is. That is more than enough.